Hi, my name is Matt, and welcome to Education Exploration. On this podcast, we explore and learn about people serving in different career industries. The conversations focus on what it takes to reach our pathways and goals to educational and professional success. All right, so welcome everyone back to this week's podcast. I appreciate you tuning in today. I'm really excited about the guest that I have on our episode. She and I kind of go way back. I know I keep saying that about all my guests, but it's really nice to connect with everyone that I've invited onto the podcast. So I really appreciate her taking the time today to have this conversation with me. And so if you wouldn't mind, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jaqueline Garcia, and I am an educator in Round Rock ISD in an elementary setting.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it, Jackie. So to kind of get us started today, and again, I appreciate you taking the time to spend with me today in our conversation. So can you kind of talk a little bit about what was life like for you when you were in college? Okay. And specifically, like, what are the types of things that maybe you've learned at that time, or you can even go back even further and just talk about, generally speaking, like, what was your college journey like?
Well, I grew up like you. I grew up in San Antonio, so we have that connection as well. And my journey into college at the end of my senior year, going into my freshman year, kind of took a turn because I had this plan in place of moving to College Station, starting out my freshman year at Texas A&M University. I had two brothers that were there already, and so I was following them to continue my educational career. However, there was just a huge family change in my family that took place in June, July timeframe that kind of turned my course for college education. It didn't start out as the way I anticipated, but because of that change, I kind of had I would say a bump in the road, but it actually wound up making me a better person. And I stayed in San Antonio for my freshman year and started out at Incarnate Word College in San Antonio for a semester. Wasn't really thrilled about staying in San Antonio, so I wanted to make sure that I was able to get back on my roadmap of getting to Texas A&M. So then the spring of my freshman year, I transferred to San Antonio College to take some classes there to get my basics. And then the summer going into my second year of college, I moved to College Station, started out with taking classes at Blinn, and then the spring of my sophomore year, I was able to get back to Texas A&M. So I kind of had to take 10 steps back so that I could take that leap of faith to go forward to get back to where I wanted to originally start. So in that time frame, I grew up a lot. I had a lot that was handed to me kind of unexpectedly, but it also it helped me to grow up. It helped me to figure out what I wanted to do. It helped me to make sure that school was for me and to make sure that I wanted to pursue that road and not just a road of going into the workforce and kind of figuring it out that way. So it was tough in the beginning, but now I look back at it and it was a great learning experience for me. And I was glad that I was able to go back to start originally where I had planned to, but it was just, life happens. Things change in a matter of 24 hours. That's kind of what happened to me, but it is what it is. And I learned from it. I grew from it. I was very happy to be able to continue my studies at Texas A&M because that's originally where I wanted to go. It just prepared me to understand that just because there's a plan in place doesn't mean that plan can't happen. It's just a matter of hard work, dedication to make sure that I still continue to work towards my goals.
Yeah, that's a great story. And I appreciate you kind of sort of painting that picture for our audience because, well, first of all, what did you study at Texas A&M?
So I graduated with my bachelor's in interdisciplinary studies, which was education. So That's kind of what I knew I wanted to do, but I wasn't completely sure. However, I come from, I don't want to say a family of educators, but my grandpa was a high school principal and basketball coach in San Antonio. I have an aunt who is in education. I have a cousin who's a teacher down in the valley. So I kind of have a background for that teaching world. So that's what led me in that area.
Yeah, so that's interesting because you're actually the first guest that I've had, at least maybe, I mean, I don't really know if maybe I just didn't ask the right question or not, but you're the first person to say that they've had so many family members in a particular industry, right? And so it's always fascinating to me when I hear people describe how, like you just did, right? Like, you had different family members that decided to pursue education. And was that particularly your first choice? Or, I mean, I'm curious about that. Like, was that essentially what you wanted to do all along?
I don't think so. If I go back and look back to where I was as a young teenager going into college, 18, 19 years old, there was so much change that was going on in my life personally that I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So when I got to Texas A&M, because of the roadmap that I had been on, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. However, I feel that I wasn't confident enough in myself as a person to look at other avenues and to think about other careers. I had a cousin that was in college, going to college to become a teacher too. So she and I were kind of talking about those things. So it was just kind of like what I wanted to do. My two brothers at Texas A&M, where one was in the College of Engineering and one was in the College of Business. But to me back then, they were brilliant people and I didn't find myself, I didn't have the confidence in me to think that I was smart enough to be in those colleges. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. I started taking some classes in education and it just really connected with me. But I think the biggest influence that I had to pursue my degree in education was because my grandfather was a high school principal and a coach. And I spent a lot of time growing up at my grandparents' house and his athletes would come visit him and talk to him because of the trials and tribulations they were experiencing in life. And I remember being in my grandparents' living room and hearing my grandpa have conversations with his students and just inspiring them to continue working hard, helping them with their grades, helping them with family situations that were happening. And because my family dynamics was changing at that time, I just felt those two connections is kind of what connected me to education. I wanted to be that person to help kids through trials and tribulations as well as educating them in the curriculum. But at the same time, I was just kind of lost because of everything that was going on. It was just so much change. It's really difficult for a person at that age anyways, trying to figure out what they want to do in life. And I had up until I was 18 years old, I had a very solid foundation at home. I grew up in a two-family home with my parents. They went to college. They have college degrees. I have brothers as well. I have a younger brother too, so he and I were at home. But then after 20 years of marriage and me graduating from high school, my parents decided that it was time for them to end their marriage. And that's what changed my whole college plan because it all happened right after I graduated a couple of weeks before I was supposed to move to A&M, and it was just a lot for me to process.
So I want to kind of pause here for a second and, well, not only one to give you a break, right? But I know because when these podcasts are being recorded, and for those of you that are out there looking to potentially start a podcast, make sure that you balance the time between the host speaking and the guest speaking to give your guest some time. No.
I can talk.
I know. No, and that's awesome. No, and I appreciate that. I feel like, man, sometimes even for me, I'm like, I just got to catch my breath for a second. But No, to get back to what you were saying, and again, if you're listening out there to this episode, I mean, it's one of those things where when you go through life sometimes and things don't work out the way that you envisioned, right? And often I find it so easy to just say, well, you know what? This happened. There's nothing I can do about it. And I'm either going to, one, continue moving forward with my plan, or two, I'm going to let it dictate me. And what I mean by that is if it's something that, and it's really hard because, very similarly to you, I've been through different types of adversity in my life. And I think looking back on it, I almost, at the time, it sucks. It totally does. But
it does,
that whole cliche about, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Like, that's true, people. Like, to be honest with you, like, I don't know if I would have even changed any of that because I wouldn't be the person that I am, very similarly to you, without having, again, a little bit of adversity in your life, because it really kind of helps you appreciate what you have, right? And I know that's so easy for some people to say, but when it's happening to you at the moment, but I don't know. It's really interesting to hear your story. I didn't realize that happened.
It is. It's even going back to San Antonio and now connecting with friends that I had in high school and them learning kind of the adversity that I faced after high school. It was shocking for them because everybody knew my parents. I had two older brothers that were involved in athletics. So my parents were everywhere. They supported them in their athletics. They supported me in my extracurricular activities. So for our family dynamic to change after I graduated from high school, it was very different for everyone. And then my younger brother, who was in middle school at the time, it was very different for him too, because his whole, it changed for me, but it was a drastic change for him. At least I was at the age of 18, making my own decisions. I could kind of figure out what I wanted to do, but he was still a minor. So he had to go through the divorce proceedings and all of that because he was still a minor. That for me and my older brothers, we didn't really have involved in that part. So it was a very big change for everybody. But at the same time, it was adversity. It was life. Things happen. I didn't want it to define me. I still knew that I wanted to go to school. The part that I guess was very hard for me is that I worked hard to make sure that I had good grades for college and did my part, made, good choices for the most part. And I was accepted not only into A&M, but I was accepted to some out-of-state schools that I really wanted to go to. And now looking back at it, if I would have chosen to go to some of those out-of-state schools, and it probably wouldn't have happened at all because of the change in my family dynamics. And I probably would have stayed in Texas just because I needed to be close to family at the same time to continue to have my support systems in place so that I could be successful in my college path. But for me, I look back at it and I guess that's kind of one of my biggest regrets is I wish I could have gone out of state for college and had that out of state experience, just kind of getting out of Texas. But at the same time, I'm grateful. I mean, I'm a diehard Aggie, just like everybody else. And it's just been a learning experience for me. So I guess kind of rambling on and going back to it, it just helps me realize how much I believe in education, not just for me as a professional, but because it helped me at one of my darkest times, because it gave me something to work for. It gave me something to take my mind off of what I was experiencing personally. And at the same time, I had a lot of fun in college. So it was kind of my encompassing point for lots of things. So, I just encourage anyone to have those experiences if they can. I realize, it may not be for everybody, but somehow, some way, whether it's a 2-year education plan, a 4-year education plan, a trade school, it's just to find your craft and really pursue it and let it help you become who you want to become and work towards your goals.
So I'm interested because you're my first guest that graduated from A&M, and And I've been to that campus several times, and I don't know, it's weird. I have this fascination with these gigantic university campuses that the buildings are beautiful. And I mean, these huge, college stadiums and athletic departments. And I think I've been to A&M maybe 4 or 5 times, something like that. But yeah, can you kind of just talk to, and I guess just shifting gears a little bit, talk to us a little bit about what that experience was like for you in college. I mean, going to such a, I'll call it elite, because that's really what it is. I mean, A&M is not an easy university to get into.
It wasn't easy. And sometimes I look back and wonder, how did I get in? I don't remember what my SAT, ACT scores were. I know that when I was in high school, I wasn't determined to get a specific score on my college entrance exams. I just kind of rolled with the punches. I had really good grades and I just applied. I applied to the schools that were on the top of my list. And when I was applying, I remember my parents at that time, because they hadn't decided yet to separate, but they basically just said, you need to pick a school in Texas or you can stay home. And I didn't want to stay home. So anyways, I had the grades. So I really, when I got to A&M, even though it was a little later than I anticipated, it was a shift. It was a cultural shift, because you grow up in San Antonio where the culture it's very diverse, but A&M wasn't to that point yet. When I went to school there, and I kind of had already, before I had gone to school there, my brothers were there. So I had visited the school a lot. It wasn't a very diverse place. It was a lot of males at the school at the time, but you could kind of see the cultural shift coming. The town was growing. There were, females too. I was in the College of Education, so it was mostly females in my classes. And it was very different, because even though I went to a 5A school in San Antonio, A&M was gigantic compared to the high school that I went with. I was working as well to support myself through college, so I didn't get to partake in a lot of extracurricular activities. I did go to some of the football games and the baseball games and things of that sort, but I wasn't involved in student activities because I had to work. I would get out of class and go straight to work. I had various jobs, just kind of like every college student does. I lived with one of my brothers and we had another roommate. So we were trying to figure out life on our own. The three of us were all working. There were times where we depended on each other to make ends meet or to find, not find our meal, but my brother worked at Freebird. So sometimes that's what we had for dinner. He would bring home beef fajita or chicken fajita, and we did all kinds of dishes with fajita meat because it was free. College kids like free food. We had to really budget our money. And at the same time, we also had a lot of fun. We were very social. We did social things on the weekends. Probably some semesters we did more social stuff than we should have, but I wasn't involved in a lot of student activities at school because my focus was academics and work. So if I could go back to A&M, I would probably, that would be one thing I could change, is to take advantage of being more involved in all of the traditions that are there. But at the same time, maybe I would pursue a different degree plan, because now that I know more as a mature adult, I would maybe focus my studies in a different area or try something out or try some different classes and maybe not just focus on being an educator. So those are my two kind of biggest regrets. Is I wish I would have participated in more student activities, and I wish I would have pursued, I guess, maybe more interest in different majors instead of going straight into education. But now I feel more confident in my abilities as a student because of the experience I have in teaching and being in the education field.
Yeah, so that's a great segue to one of the questions that I gave you ahead of time for the podcast, but I'm kind of just wondering if I'm not real familiar with the College of Education there at Texas A&M, and I'm not real sure if how they prepared their teachers for, that transition from college into the classroom. If you wouldn't mind, can you kind of just talk a little bit about what are the classes classes like there when you're studying education?
Well, it's kind of been a while. So what the classes were like back then, maybe a lot different what it is now. But I think at that time and when I was there, of course, the classes are big. They're huge because it's a huge university. So you do have those classes where you're in an auditorium with 300 people because you're taking a core class that we all need to graduate. But as I got deeper into my field of study, of course, the class sizes diminish. What I do remember is going to classes, especially my education classes, going to classes that were smaller in size, maybe 30 to 50 people, and they were mostly attended by females, but even more so, the number of Hispanic females in those classes diminished greatly. So I do really remember that. I remember looking around and seeing that there weren't other students that looked like me in the classes that I was taking, because A&M the diversity was very different than what I was used to growing up in San Antonio. But as I got deeper into my education classes, I felt that I was very prepared because I started going into the elementary school settings in College Station. So College Station in Bryan is kind of like Austin and Round Rock.
Okay.
It's very connected. So, my sophomore year, I started volunteering at an elementary school in Bryan. And I really connected with the people there, with the students. It was a small elementary school. I connected with the students and the staff there. And so then my junior year, I had kind of I wouldn't say it was an internship, and it wasn't my student teaching, and I don't remember what it was called, but I was assigned to a kindergarten classroom for one semester, and I went into that kindergarten classroom maybe 3 times a week. I was able to interact with the students and kind of learn the teaching roles of the teacher, but it wasn't my student teaching because I wasn't ever in charge of the class on my own, like in a student teaching role. So I really, really liked the school, connected with the people. And then the following year, when I started my student teaching, luckily I was assigned to the same campus, but as a student teacher, I was in a second grade classroom. And this was the fall. So the teacher that I was assigned to was just about to retire. And she had, I want to say, like hundreds of personal days that she still needed to take because she wasn't going to get paid out for them and she was going to lose them. So in my student teaching experience, I remember the teacher being with me for the first 2 weeks of the fall semester. And then towards the end of the second week, she basically just said, okay, I'm going to start taking my personal and sick days because you're here. Here's my number. If you need anything, call me and let me know when I need to do an observation, a written observation, and I'll come in and observe you. But she basically just gave me free reign of the class because she was taking her time. But then at the end of October of my student teaching, I was going to graduate in December. So the end of October of my student teaching career, I had planned to move back to San Antonio after graduation. I was going to look for a job, but then a teacher at the school decided teaching wasn't for her anymore and didn't show up on a Monday morning and decided that she was going to quit just right then and there on the spot. So the principal for that school made a phone call to my, I guess, student teacher professor. I don't even remember who it was. The College of Education granted the school district permission to take me out of student teaching to offer me a teaching position in third grade. And even though I wasn't going to graduate until December, so I remember taking over the teaching position in third grade at the beginning of November, and I was paid as a teacher. And that's how I wound up staying in Bryan College Station, because I got a job before I was even done with my student teaching career.
So for our audience, okay, I'm just going to tell you all this right now. That story that Jackie just told, that is something that honestly I've been in And so interestingly enough, Jackie, I'm going into my 10th year in education. That is literally the first time I have ever heard of a situation like that happen.
Yep. And
I
even now, I agree. Even now, I share that story too. And lots of people are like, wow. So I think about it, and I was just at the right place at the right time. I already had built those relationships with the school because I already had been going there. It was a matter of, do I want to take this position in November, or do I want to wait and graduate in December, move back home, hopefully find a job in the middle of the school year? I may have to sub, I may not get hired, or I can just stay and take this job. And again, just kind of, it's life, you kind of go with what's presented to you. And I really enjoyed it. And so much so that I took over the class in November. I still graduated in December. I walked the stage at A&M. I didn't have to experience the anxiety of, am I going to get hired? Am I going to take over a class in December? Do I want to take over a class in December? Is there going to be an opening? Am I going to have to sub? All those things that kind of come with our profession when you're graduating in December, because the school year has already started. You just got to kind of wait and see what's available for jobs because it's the middle of the school year. And here I was at a school where I already knew the systems. I kind of knew the kids. I knew the principal. I knew administration. I already had all those things in place, just the little things. I knew where the copier was. I knew where to go make copies. I knew what the expectations of the teachers were. So it gave me the time to just focus on my teaching.
Yeah, no, so I appreciate you really bringing to light those points, because you started off in a way that, again, probably doesn't happen. I mean, ever really, right? But you're absolutely right in that the transition was very seamless for you, and
right.
You didn't have to really worry about, those, I don't want to say I don't know, for those of y'all that out there listening again that, have ever transitioned either from, one career to another, or starting your career off for the first time, or whatever the case may be, like the way Jackie just described that transition, that's ultimately kind of how you want to feel in a way. You don't want to have to worry about, like you said, you're graduating in December, which that even of itself is very difficult depending on what, particular career field you're trying to get into. But no, I really do thank you for sharing that. So to kind of pivot or transition a little bit, one of the things that I was really interested in knowing is, so how did you end up in Round Rock? And I guess I can start off with, or if you want to talk about how long you stayed in Bryan, and then kind of what that looked like transitioning into not only a different city, but a new school district.
Right. So I stayed in Bryan. I was thinking about this. I stayed in Bryan at Crockett Elementary for, I believe, 3 years. So I taught third grade, and I was actually a bilingual teacher too. So I started out as a bilingual teacher, which is now dual language. I started teaching out third grade bilingual, and then my last third grade class, the teachers went through a lot of writing training, which made sense because we had just transitioned to the tax test. So the students were taking the tax test. Of course, in fourth grade, they have writing. So third grade teachers were going through a lot of intensive writing training to help kids get ready for fourth grade. So my last year teaching third grade bilingual, the fourth grade bilingual teaching position came open at the end of one of the years that I was there. So my principal asked me to loop with my class to fourth grade because I already had implemented kind of the writing training to the kids. So it just kind of made sense. Instead of hiring someone new, getting them trained to do what I was already doing, she asked me if I would loop with the kids to fourth grade. And I did, because every class that I have had, I look back and my passion is being with the kids. I connected well with the kids. I connected connected well with the parents. And when I remember having the conversation with my principal towards the end of the year, and she said, well, I'm asking you to consider looping to fourth grade for two reasons. One, because you do have the writing training that I would have to spend a lot of time teaching a new hire. But two, I already have parent requests from your third grade parents for you to move to fourth grade with them. And so I did that. And I mean, we had a great year. And then at the end of the fourth grade year, my principal asked if I would loop with them to fifth grade. So it just so happened that each year after that, the dual language or bilingual position came open for each grade level for that class. And so my plan was to loop up with them to fifth grade. So I would have had the same kids for 3 years, which would have been ideal because I know the kids, I know the parents, they know me, we know each other's systems, our strengths and weaknesses. And that was my plan. However, right before teachers went back to school in August, my husband was transferred for his job from College Station to Austin. So that's what led me to move here. But it was, again, a very quick transition. He was notified about this time of the year in 2007. And he was basically told, like, you have 2 weeks to move your family and move to Austin. So when I moved to Austin, all that was open in kind of the area for teaching positions was fifth grade bilingual. So I was hired in Round Rock as a fifth grade bilingual teacher. And I had never taught fifth grade, but I was going to teach fifth grade anyways, whether I stayed in Bryan or came here. So when I moved to Round Rock in 2007, I was hired as a fifth grade bilingual teacher. And I did interview in a couple of different school districts in the area, but ultimately I chose the position in Round Rock.
So one thing that is hearing you speak, and I wonder, so essentially the way it sounds, that dual language program was evolving, right? And so you were
Yes.
kind of leading, the charge, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, of that new initiative on that campus. And so I'm wondering how all that time with you spending with those particular kids, how did that help you kind of transition into fifth grade? I know you said that you never taught fifth grade, but you were going to if had you stayed in Bryan. But I'm wondering just how did those skills or whatever you want to call it, how did that help you with this new role in Round Rock?
Well, first, looking back at it, I don't know if Bryan, and I don't mean this in any bad way, it just, of course, Bryan is a smaller city. So you have a smaller city, you have a smaller district. I'm not really sure what funding was like at that time, but I do remember being at that school. We were an Apple district. So along with all of the teaching training that I was receiving, I was also receiving a lot of technology training. And I remember when my husband, told me that he had been offered a position in the Austin area, would I be willing to move? I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to lose all the technology that I have access to in teaching because, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I was a one-to-one classroom with MacBooks or with laptops. I don't even know if it was MacBooks back then, but with Apple laptops at my district. So I was already teaching with technology. I was already implementing technology. I remember having 6 huge Apple computers in my classroom as desktops for my kids, and also having a cart of 25 student devices. And I was one-to-one. We didn't have the interactive boards yet, but because I already had connected with the kids, I feel like every year I was able to grow as an educator with either the curriculum or the technology because I knew the kids. I knew the areas that I needed to focus on. I knew the families. Of course, we had new kids that joined our class, each year, because that's just kind of what happens every school year. But I was able to focus and really delve into the curriculum and focus on how I can enhance the curriculum using technology because our connection was already there. And I mean, our connection was there to the point of when I found out we were moving to Austin and basically had 8 days to get here, I let my principal know. My principal at the time contacted the families of my students. And Matt, I had parents of my students show up at my house to help my husband and I pack our house so that we could move here in time. So that just kind of paints the picture of the connection that I had with the families at that time. And I was so heartbroken to have to tell them that I was leaving, but at the same time, they knew I had to do what was best for my family. And I'm grateful to social media because I'm connected with those parents still via social media. And I mean, their kids are grown now. Some of them are married and have families of their own. And I see what they're doing on Facebook because I've connected with the parents. And I had the kids when they were in third grade. So that's the part of education that I love, is just keeping in contact with my past students. Even here in Round Rock, I have made some connections via social media with former students. And, at the same time, I've been able to also reach out to families through social media when I know like the families are maybe facing a hardship or they're struggling somehow. So it's just making those lifelong connections with not just students, but with the families as well. So that experience in Bryan really helped me focus on my teaching ability, and then coming here to Round Rock and transferring what I learned, but at the same time realizing back then that I guess I'm grateful because I seem to have stayed ahead of a lot of curves. And the experience that I've had, because I'm so open and kind of willing to change and not focus on keeping things the same, I think that's really helped me be successful in my education career because I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to try, and I feel like somehow or another, it's led me into the right path of just staying ahead of the education curves.
So I sort of want to preface my next question, but I'm going to ask you something. Were you part of the NextGen program as a teacher in the classroom? Okay. So
Yes.
for our audience members that I'm just kind of real briefly explain what the NextGen program was for Round Rock ISD. It was essentially a program established to get technology devices in the classroom. And I don't know all the specifics of how it historically evolved, but essentially, and that's kind of the whole gist of it, is that it was fast tracking technology integration into the classroom. We'll kind of just call it that way. And so I do remember, and I don't even know if you and I had this conversation, a few years back, or how I even knew that you were a NextGen teacher. But can you talk a little bit about what that was like using or being a part of that program in Round Rock ISD?
So I remember my ITS just having a connection with that person. And so I would often go to her and collaborate with her on ideas for integrating technology in the classroom because I already had been in Round Rock for many years, but I enjoyed integrating technology because of my background in the Bryan Independent School District. So I remember my ITS coming to me and telling me, hey, Round Rock is going to launch this initiative. I think you would be a really good candidate. However, you have to apply. And I was like, perfect, like, great. I'm, willing to apply. I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see, what would happen if I don't get it. It's not a big deal. But I did apply, and I was a NextGen teacher at my campus. The first year of the pilot, they only awarded one teacher at each campus the NextGen classroom. So what that was, I was going to receive my own cart of devices dedicated to my classroom so that I could kind of pilot devices in my classroom with my kids in different areas. There, of course, were some requirements. They would ask me to teach certain lessons under the NextGen cohort and kind of give them feedback on how did this work, what went well, what can we tweak. So I was lucky in that when I was awarded NextGen teacher, I didn't know what kind of devices I was going to be assigned to, but it just so happened that I was lucky and I was assigned a cart of 32 iPads for my fifth grade dual language classroom, which at that time was great. I was very excited. We were able to do some things. I really learned that fifth graders at that time were very motivated by technology. And I had kids that were helping me learn iPads too, because back then iPads were fairly new. They were just kind of coming out. We were learning more about privacy policies and kids utilizing devices and how much personal information kids could eventually release without knowing what we were getting into, because you just go into the app store and download an app and you agree to all those terms, but you don't realize that it was either collecting my name or, collecting personal information. So it was a great pilot because not only did it pilot the devices and the integrating technology with curriculum, but it also started opening our eyes on privacy policies and releasing personal information and getting parent permission, and probably helping kind of lead the whole, COPA and FERPA laws as well. But at the same time, I also realized that technology couldn't be the only force driving the instruction. Like, kids needed a balance. And some things that would work well maybe on a laptop didn't work well on an iPad just because of compatibility challenges. Yes, we are a Google campus, but on an iPad, it was very challenging because you had to download every single app, whereas a laptop, you just open a window or a different window and it's there. So there were a lot of pros, and I don't want to say cons because it wasn't really a con. I mean, it can't be a con to have 32 iPads in your classroom. It's just you had to really problem solve and figure out ways. But at the same time, I think it also motivated my kids because I'll be perfectly honest, I depended on the kids a lot on learning the device, because when they left the classroom, they could go home, and if they had an iPad, they could figure things out on an iPad. And when I came home, I had to be a mom and a wife and cook dinner and help my children with schoolwork and, get some sleep and self-care. And I would get back to school the next day. And I really remember I had 3 boys that were motivated by technology. So I would tell them like, hey, today go home with your parent permission and download this app and tell me what you can figure out. And the next day they would come to class and they would be like, oh, I want to show you, like, on this app, you could do this. On this app, you could do that. But it gave them those leadership opportunities that they really needed because they were helping me teach the class because they had time to figure those things out and they were motivated as well. So even though in my role now as an ITS on my campus, which is an Instructional Technology Specialist, don't have all the answers when it comes to technology, because there is so much technology out there that it's humanly impossible for me to know how all of the devices work, how all of the apps work. And I do rely on my coworkers to help me figure things out. I do rely on the kids to help me figure things out. But at the same time, it also builds collaboration, and it also gives the teachers and the students leadership roles.
So, Jackie, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I have truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to be able to listen to all of your wonderful stories today. And again, I am so fascinated by everything that we've talked about today in our conversation. So to close out our podcast, if you wouldn't mind just sharing some inspirational words for our audience, and you can kind of take this in really any direction that you want to. You can talk about inspiration for the upcoming school year, or anything having to do with career or life or anything like that. So if you could just share some of those wonderful insights for us today.
Well, first, thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it. I apologize if I just kind of rambled on about all of my experiences. I have been in education for almost 20 years, so I feel like I have a lot of experiences and a lot of different experiences. But for the listeners out there, no matter what your age is or what your path is. I'm a true believer in education because I come from a background where I saw education open doors for lots of people. It opened doors for my grandfather because back then, as a Hispanic, and he was able to not only pursue his education, but he got his master's and eventually became a high school principal and coach. And because of that, he really instilled the value of education on his children, which would be my dad and my mom too. They worked hard to pursue their education. And my parents really worked hard to get to obtain their degrees and open those doors so that they could improve their way of living. And because of that, they instilled education on my brothers and I. So I'm a very strong believer in education. I want to continue to inspire anyone and everyone to pursue their education because that's something that no matter what you experience in life, it can never be taken away from you. Nobody can ever go after your bachelor's degree and strip you of that experience or, even if it's a master's degree or a doctorate degree. And it doesn't have to be from elite school. It can be from any school. It could be from a trade school. It could be from anything. Just take the time to educate yourself in a passion that really drives you to wake up every day, to want to go to work, to be happy. It may not make you the richest person in the world, but you're crafting your passion and you're doing what you love every single day. I love what I do because I love the connection with kids. That's what I miss the most in my role as a ITS, that I'm not in a classroom dedicated to a specific group of kids, but I'm at a campus where I can help 800 kids, but I don't have that one-to-one connection. I don't have the connection with parents as well, the way that I did when I had a dedicated classroom. But I want to inspire anyone and everyone, no matter how you identify, no matter what your race is, no matter what your religion is, just to go out, educate yourself somehow in some way.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. Be sure to subscribe. Episodes are available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Follow me on social media using the handles @education_explo or @MattEdutech. We'll chat again soon.